The dust on the surrender table would not settle. Voron Kale noticed it first as a small wrongness, the kind of detail his training told him to ignore and his instincts told him to fear. He had presided over 11 planetary disarmaments. On every world, the moment the local commanders laid down their arms, a stillness fell, a physics of defeat, air going quiet as a species accepted the end of its resistance. Here, on Earth, in a concrete hangar that smelled of rain and machine oil, the dust hung in the light and refused to come down. He watched it drift, motes turning slow circles in the beam from the high windows, as though something beneath the floor were breathing. "Why is the air moving?" he asked. The human across the table, a woman with gray at her temples and a bandage on her left hand, did not look up from the document she was signing. "Old ventilation," she said. "Building's 100 years old." The building was not 100 years old. His fleet scans had logged its construction at 19 months. He said nothing. He filed the lie away with the others. That was the first thing that was wrong, and he would spend the rest of his life understanding it. The Concordance had come to Earth to seize an arsenal. This was not conquest in the crude sense. The Concordance did not burn worlds, it inventoried them. 90,000 years of expansion had taught the 7 founding species a single elegant principle. You do not destroy a civilization's weapons, you take them, you catalog them, you fold their violence into your own and leave the population alive to be useful. A disarmed species was a grateful species. A grateful species paid tribute for 1,000 generations. Earth's file had flagged an anomaly, and the anomaly was the reason Kale himself had come instead of a subordinate. Humanity's weapons signature did not match humanity's technological tier. Their fusion was clumsy. Their computation was a century behind the galactic floor. Their ships were slow, riveted, ugly things that should not have survived first contact with a Concordance picket. And yet 3 Concordance survey vessels had entered the Sol system over the preceding decade, and 3 Concordance survey vessels had never come back, and the telemetry from all 3 cut out in the same way. Not an explosion, not a weapon discharge, just a sudden, total silence, as if the ships had been unmade between one transmission frame and the next. No wreckage. No debris. No bodies. That was the second thing that was wrong, and it was the reason the woman signing the surrender was still alive to sign it. The Concordance needed the weapon that had eaten 3 ships. They had come with 200 vessels and 40,000 troops to make Earth hand it over, and Earth had surrendered on the first day without firing a shot. That was the third thing. And it was the worst. The document requires the location of your strategic weapons stockpiles, Kale said. All of them. Withholding is a capital offense under Concordance disarmament protocol. The woman, her identification listed her as Director Renata Sol, no rank, no military designation, which was itself a small anomaly he had not yet accounted for, set down her pen and finally looked at him. "There's no stockpile," she said. "3 of our ships are missing." "Yes. You do not deny it." "No." He waited for more. Humans, in his limited experience, could not tolerate silence. They filled it, they explained, they bargained. Renata Sol folded her bandaged hand over her whole one and waited with him, and the dust turned in the light between them, and for the first time in a very long career Voron Kale felt the specific cold of not knowing what was in the room with him. "Where is the weapon?" he said. "You're looking for a thing," she said. "That's your first mistake." They gave the Concordance everything. This was what unsettled his analysts over the following days. Humanity did not resist the inventory. They opened their silos, their labs, their vaults. Kale's teams walked through it all and found exactly what the tier assessment had predicted: crude fission devices, chemical propellants, kinetic slug throwers, primitive orbital lasers. A child's arsenal. Nothing that could unmake a survey vessel between 2 transmission frames. "They're hiding it," said Submarshal Threll, his second, on the 4th night. Threll was of the Ossic, a species that had been conquering for 60,000 years and had never once been surprised. "They surrendered to buy time. They're moving the real weapon while we count their toys." "Where would they move it?" Kale said. "We hold the orbitals. Nothing leaves this planet without our seeing it." "Then it's underground. We've mapped the crust to 9 kilometers. Threll's mandibles clicked, the Ossic gesture for a problem that refused to resolve. Then explain the ships. Kale could not. And in the not explaining, the first misinterpretation took root, and it would cost them more than any of them yet understood. Because there was one dataset the Concordance had not fully processed. In the days before the surrender, human transmissions, millions of them, civilian, chaotic, untranslated, had flooded the Concordance intercept banks. The linguists had triaged them for military content and found none, and so the transmissions had been deprioritized. But Kale, unable to sleep in the low gravity of his command ship, had begun reading them himself. They were not military. That was true. They were letters. Goodbye letters. Millions of them. Parents to children, soldiers to spouses, strangers to strangers. And the Concordance, seeing no weapon language in them, had concluded that this was the sound of a species accepting defeat. Kale read 400 of them that night and understood, slowly, that he was reading something else. He did not yet have a word for it. The humans were not saying goodbye because they had lost. They were saying goodbye because they had already decided to do something, and they did not expect to survive it. He flagged the dataset as urgent. By the time anyone acted on it, it was far too late. "Tell me about your weapon," Kale said. He had requested that Renata Soul be brought to his ship. She sat in the interrogation module in her civilian clothes, her bandaged hand in her lap, looking at the Concordance's technology with an interest that was almost gentle, the way one might look at the toys of a child one is about to disappoint. "You keep asking the wrong question," she said. "You want to know what the weapon is. You should be asking who agreed to become it." "That is not an answer. It's the only answer there is." She shifted. "Do you know what your survey ships transmitted right before they went quiet?" He did. He had memorized it. Fragmentary. Sensor confusion. One recorded phrase before signal loss. He hesitated. "They're not stopping." "They're not stopping," she repeated softly, and something moved behind her eyes that he did not have a name for. "You built a civilization on knowing when to stop. Every species does. It's the most basic law there is. You fight until the cost of fighting exceeds the value of winning, and then you stop, because continuing is irrational." She leaned forward. "That's your whole empire, isn't it? You've conquered 1,000 worlds and never lost, because every world you meet does the math and surrenders when the math says surrender." "The math is not wrong." "No," she agreed. "The math is never wrong. That's the problem." He should have ended the interview there. Instead he said, "Explain." "We did the math too," Renata said. "We're not stupid. We ran your numbers. 200 ships. 40,000 troops. Weapons 1,000 years past ours. There is no version of this where we win." She smiled, and it was the worst thing he had seen on Earth, worse than the dust that wouldn't settle. "So we stopped trying to win." The cold came back into the room. "We're not fighting to win, Voron Kale," she said, using his name for the first time, gently, the way you'd say the name of someone at their own funeral. "We decided that a long time ago. Around the time your third ship went quiet." The second misinterpretation happened 40 hours later, and it happened because the Concordance was too competent. Standard protocol during an inventory was to relocate a fraction of the conquered population, key personnel, scientific minds, cultural leaders, to Concordance holding stations. Hostages, though the word was never used. It kept a species docile. Kale ordered the relocation of 2,000 of Earth's most critical individuals, and Earth cooperated fully, providing names, locations, and this was the detail that Threll flagged as suspicious, volunteers in excess of the request. "They gave us more than we asked for," Threll said. 3,000 where we wanted 2. "Additional cooperation," Kale said. "It's consistent with surrender behavior." "It's consistent with something," Threll said, and for once Kale heard genuine unease in the old Ossic's voice. The 3,000 humans boarded the holding transports calmly. They did not weep. They did not cling to their families. The families, in fact, seemed almost proud, seeing them off, and the Concordance recorded this as evidence of a species that had accepted its new place. 9 hours after the transports docked with the holding station, The holding station stopped transmitting. Not an explosion. Not a weapon discharge. Just silence. The same silence, the exact spectral signature of the 3 survey ships, a sudden total unmaking between one frame and the next. Kale watched the telemetry cut out and felt the floor of his understanding drop away. The weapon was on the transports, Threll hissed. They smuggled it aboard, We scanned every one of them to the bone, Kale said. There was no device. There was no material. There was nothing on those transports but 3,000 unarmed human beings. Silence in the command module. Then how? Threll said. Kale did not answer, because the answer had begun to assemble itself in the back of his mind, and it was a shape he did not want to look at directly. 3,000 volunteers. More than requested. Boarding calmly. Families proud. Goodbye letters, millions of them, written before the surrender was even signed. You should be asking who agreed to become it. Bring me the director, he said. His voice did not sound like his own. She came without protest. She always came without protest, and he was beginning to understand that this was not cooperation but something far more frightening. A person who had nothing left to be afraid of, walking through a world that no longer had any power over her. Your holding station is gone, he said. I know. How? You still think I'm going to tell you the mechanism? She sighed, and for the first time she looked tired, human, mortal. There's no mechanism, Kale. There's no device. There's no weapon you can seize because the thing you're afraid of isn't a thing. She held up her bandaged hand. You want to know what's under this? He said nothing. She unwound the bandage. Beneath it, her hand was unmarked. There had never been a wound. It's a habit, she said. We bandage what isn't hurt yet. We prepare for pain that hasn't come. You've been staring at this bandage for 6 days trying to figure out what injury it hides, and the answer is none. It's a promise to myself about how much I'm willing to bleed later. She wrapped it again, slowly. That's the weapon. Not the bandage. The willingness. And you can't put willingness in an inventory. 3,000 people are dead, Kale said. 3,000 people are spent, she corrected, and the distinction was so cold, so precise, that he felt it in the architecture of his own species' assumptions. There's a difference. Dead is what happens to you when you lose. Spent is what happens to a currency when you pay with it. Pay for what? And there it was, the question she had been steering him toward for 6 days, the question she wanted him to ask, and he heard the trap close even as the words left him. She smiled. Now you're asking the right thing. But she did not answer it. Not yet. She simply stood and let the concordance escort her back to the surface, and left the question hanging in the recycled air of his ship like dust that would not settle. Here is what the concordance did not know, and what took Kale 3 more days and 11,000 casualties to begin to understand. For 90,000 years, the concordance had won every war it fought because it fought against species that shared one universal trait, a survival instinct that functioned as a brake. Every civilization the concordance had ever met would, at some threshold of loss, choose to preserve itself over its objective. This was not cowardice. It was sanity. It was, the concordance believed, the fundamental operating principle of any mind complex enough to build a starship. You do not spend what you cannot replace. You do not burn the seed corn. You do not, above all, volunteer for the fire. Humans had a survival instinct too. That was what fooled everyone. It looked, from the outside, exactly like every other species. The flinch, the fear, the desperate love of life. What the concordance had not understood was that in humans, this instinct could be overridden by decision. Not by rage. Rage was common. Every warlike species had rage, and rage burned out. Not by fanaticism, which the concordance knew how to break by removing the leader or the belief. This was something else. This was a cold, deliberate collective choice, made by ordinary people at kitchen tables, to keep going past the point where continuing made any sense, and then to keep the choice even after the fear returned, which it always did, because they made the choice knowing the fear would return and deciding it did not matter. The survey ships had not been destroyed by a weapon. They had been boarded, in the dark, by human vessels that should not have been able to catch them, crewed by people who had done the math, understood they would not return, and accelerated anyway. No weapon signature, because there had been no weapon. Only human hands, and a willingness to trade 3 human lives for every one of the enemy, and then 4, and then 10, in a calculus that no rational species could sustain and that humans, apparently, could sustain indefinitely. The holding station had died the same way. 3,000 volunteers, unarmed, who had walked calmly aboard knowing exactly what they intended to do with their bodies and their bare hands against a crew that had never in 60,000 years imagined an enemy who would attack after surrendering. The surrender had never been a surrender. It had been a delivery mechanism. They surrendered to get inside, Threll said, and his ancient voice had gone thin. The surrender wasn't the end of the war. It was the opening move. Yes, Kale said. That's not. The Ossic groped for the word and found only the oldest one his species had. That's not allowed. You don't surrender and then attack. That's not how war works. They know that, Kale said quietly. That's why it works. He went down to the surface himself. Protocol forbade it. He went anyway, because he had begun to understand that protocol was written by a civilization that had never met an enemy who broke the rules on purpose. And every rule he followed was a rule the humans had already read and already turned into a weapon. He found Renata Soul in the concrete hangar where the surrender had been signed. She was sitting at the same table. The dust still hung in the light. You came down, she said. She sounded almost sad. You shouldn't have. Every one of your people who touches this planet is a piece we get to spend. Then why warn me? She considered him for a long moment. Because I don't hate you, she said. That's the part your people can't process. This isn't hate. Hate burns out. You're right about that. You've broken 100 worlds that hated you. This is arithmetic. You put a price on us. We looked at the price. And we decided to pay it, all of it, everything, down to the last one of us. Because the alternative is 1,000 generations of tribute and a leash. She looked at her bandaged hand. We'd rather be spent than owned. Every single one of us made that choice. That's the number your analysts can't find. There's no stockpile because the stockpile is everyone. You cannot win, Kale said. Even now. Even like this. We have 200 ships. We can burn this planet from orbit. Yes, she said. You can. You should have done it on the first day. The way she said it stopped his breath. But you didn't, she went on. Because your entire empire is built on taking worlds intact, and burning us gets you nothing. No arsenal, no tribute, no useful population, just a scorched rock and 200 ships that now have to explain to the Concordance why they spent a conquest fleet to destroy the very thing they were sent to seize. She smiled that terrible gentle smile. You can't afford to win the way you'd have to win. And we can't lose, because we already decided losing costs less than surviving your way. Do you see it now? Do you see the shape of it? He saw it. The Concordance's greatest strength, its refusal to destroy, its patient hunger to own, was the exact leverage humanity had reached out and closed its bare human hand around. 200 ships, unable to withdraw without disgrace, unable to burn the planet without waste, unable to occupy it without feeding themselves piece by piece into a population that would spend itself down to the last child before it would kneel. You've trapped us, he said. No, Renata said. You trapped yourselves 90,000 years ago. The first time winning came easy. We just waited for someone to walk in expecting it to be easy again. The occupation lasted 6 weeks. Kale documented all of it, because someone had to, because the Concordance would need to understand what had happened here even if, especially if, no ship survived to carry the record home. He watched his fleet learn, slowly and at enormous cost, the thing that Renata Soul had told him on the first day and that he had not been able to hear. They tried containment. Humans in Concordance custody found ways to become dangerous with nothing, with a bootlace, with a fall, with the simple refusal to be moved that turned every prisoner transfer into a battle of attrition the Concordance always technically won and always actually lost. Every human life the Concordance took cost the Concordance more than it could replace, because the concordance could not make more concordance, and humans, it turned out, could keep making the choice. They tried terror. They executed 1,000 and broadcast it. The broadcast produced no submission. It produced, instead, more volunteers, because the humans had already grieved, already written the letters, already decided, and a threat only works on someone who has not yet accepted the cost. The Concordance's terror machine, perfected over 60,000 years, discharged itself into a population that had disarmed the machine simply by no longer being afraid to die. They tried, finally, negotiation. And this was the moment Kale understood that the war had been lost before the first ship arrived, because when his diplomats offered terms, real terms, generous terms, autonomy and self-governance and a fraction of the tribute, the humans said no. Why? His diplomat demanded, baffled, of a captured human officer. We're offering you your freedom, your lives, everything you were fighting for. And the officer, a young man with a broken arm and his sister's name written on his cast, said the thing that Kale ordered transcribed and carried on every escape pod when the end came. We weren't fighting for our lives. We were fighting so that the next species you find doesn't have to. You surrender to us now, all of you, the whole concordance, or we spend ourselves teaching every world you own how we did it. And we've got 7 billion lessons left. The turning point did not come from Earth's weapons, because Earth had no weapons worth the name. It came from arithmetic, and it came the way Renata's soul had promised. Inevitable in hindsight, impossible to see coming. In the 6th week, the Concordance fleet did the math. Not the humans. The Concordance. Kale assembled the projection himself and laid it before Submarshal Threll and the fleet's 7 species commanders in the command module while, below them, Earth continued to spend itself with a patience that had stopped looking like desperation and started looking like something closer to love. Current attrition rate, Kale said, projected against the full human population, yields conquest in 14 years. He let that settle. We do not have 14 years. We have supply for 8 months. To hold this planet to the end, we would need to commit not this fleet, but 9 more like it. 9 conquest fleets, for one world, that produces no arsenal, no tribute, and no survivors. Then we withdraw, said the Vetch commander. Blockade the system. Contain them. They will not be contained, Kale said. They have already told us. They will build the crude ships they build, and they will crew them with people who have decided not to come back, and they will go out into the Concordance and they will teach. He looked at each of them. You have all read the officer's statement. 7 billion lessons. They mean it. They have proven 6 times over, in ways every one of you has watched, that they mean everything they say, because they have removed from themselves the capacity to be bluffing. Silence in the module. The oldest silence in the galaxy. The silence of a civilization that had never lost, discovering the shape of the thing that would cost it everything. What are you proposing? Threll said, very quietly. Kale put the second projection on the display. It was a single word, in the trade tongue of the Concordance, and it was a word that had not been spoken by any commander of the 7 founding species in 90,000 years. Withdraw. Not blockade, Kale said. Not contain. Erase this system from the survey. Bury the record. And pray to whatever your species prays to that they keep their word, and stay home, and never learn how far we run. That's not withdrawal, the Vetch commander whispered. That's surrender. Yes, Kale said. It is. He went down one last time to tell her. The dust still would not settle. He understood now that it never would, that it was the vibration of the machines beneath the hangar, the ones that had been running the whole time, not weapons but factories, building the ugly riveted ships one after another, patient, endless, each one a coffin its pilot had chosen. The building was 19 months old. She had lied on the first day for the pleasure of watching him fail to understand, and he had spent 6 weeks and 30,000 of his people's lives understanding. We're leaving, he said. Renata's soul looked up from the table. And for the first time in 6 weeks, something in her face broke. Not triumph, not relief, but grief, vast and quiet and older than he had realized a human face could hold. How many? She asked. We took 9,000 of yours, he said. Before the end. No, she shook her head. Not yours. Ours. How many did we lose? To make you leave? Total. He gave her the number. It was a large number. It was a number that would have broken any species he had ever conquered. A number that no rational civilization would ever pay for a single world. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, and her voice when it came was the smallest he had ever heard it. That's the part you'll never write in your report, she said. You'll write that we were fearless. That we didn't feel it. That we were built different. She wiped her face with her bandaged hand. We felt every one. Every single one. We wrote the letters and we sent them anyway, and we cried in the dark before we did it, and we did it anyway. That's the weapon, Kale. Not that it didn't hurt. That we kept going while it hurt. She looked at him. You'll go home and you'll tell them humans don't break. That's the wrong lesson. We break. We break like anyone. We just decided, a long time ago, that breaking isn't the same as stopping. He had no answer. In 90,000 years, his civilization had never needed one. Why warn the others? He said finally. Why tell us to run? If you've won, why let us live at all? Renata's soul stood. She wound the bandage tighter on the hand that had never been hurt, the promise to herself about how much she was still willing to bleed, and she gave him the last thing, the thing he carried back across the dark to a concordance that would never again sleep easily among its 1,000 quiet worlds. Because winning your way costs us who we are, she said. And we're not done being who we are. Not yet. She looked at the dust turning in the light. Go home, Voron Kale. Tell them what we are. Tell them we're not the strongest thing out here. We know we're not, we've done the math, we'll always be outgunned and outnumbered and behind. Her voice dropped. Tell them we're the thing that doesn't stop. Tell them there's a species out here that will spend its last child to keep its first promise, and that it is coming to understand exactly how much of the galaxy runs on everyone else knowing when to quit. The Concordance fleet left Sol Space 11 hours later. 200 ships, 40,000 troops, 90,000 years of certainty, withdrawing from a world that had never fired a shot they could inventory. Kale filed his report. He recommended the system be buried, and it was. He recommended contact with humanity be avoided at all costs, and for a while it was. But he never slept the same again. None of them did. Because somewhere out in the dark, beneath a hangar with dust that would not settle, ugly riveted ships were still being built, one after another, each waiting for a pilot who had already written the letter, already cried in the dark, already decided. And Voron Kale understood, in the small hours of every night for the rest of his long life, the thing his empire had learned too late and would never be able to forget. They had come to seize humanity's arsenal. They had not understood that humanity was the arsenal, that the weapon had never been a thing to be taken, but a decision to be made, 7 billion times over at kitchen tables, in the dark, by ordinary people who felt every ounce of the fear and the grief and the pain and looked at the price of quitting, and chose, again and again and again, to keep going anyway. The galaxy had built itself on knowing when to stop. And into that galaxy, patient and grieving and utterly unwilling to be owned, humanity had simply arrived.